I've always looked much younger than my actual age. Back when I was a teenager and rolling into my early to mid-20s, this was a huge problem for me as I used to always get carded for alcohol or get talked down to because I look like a kid. But now I'm in my mid-30s. It kind of works in my favor. But back when I was a teenager, the whole looking like a kid thing almost got me abducted once. And this is that story. It was just after my 14th birthday, when my grandpa decided to take me and my little brother on a trip to the gas station to pick up diesel for the tractor. I know that doesn't sound very exciting, but back then, we all lived on a dairy farm way out in the sticks, so there wasn't much else to do, and seeing the shiny gas station with all the snacks and candy was something of a major event for us. Kinda sad, I know, but whatever. Anyways, we rode over there, 3 deep in his single-cab Chevy S10, with me in the middle seat and my little brother on the passenger side. When we get to the gas station, my grandfather parks at a pump and heads inside. Only thing is, when he turns off the engine, he leaves the key in the ignition with us buckled inside of it. Considering we lived on the outskirts of a small town with next to nobody in it, and where basically nothing happens, this wasn't unusual. There was always a sense of trust and community where I grew up, and since everyone knew everyone else, it was totally normal to leave your doors and garages unlocked, leave your wallet in the local diner in view, and you get the idea. Anyways, just after my grandpa walked into the gas station to make small talk with the clerk, like I said, everyone knew everyone, this guy just appears at the passenger side window and starts trying to talk to my brother. We'd been brought up to be friendly and polite to folks, even to strangers. But while my brother seemed only too happy to talk to the guy, even if he was a little shy, I got this straight-up bad feeling about the guy, like deep down in my gut. I know it might sound a little kooky of me, but you know when people on the TV talk about how they can see people's auras floating around them as they're talking? There was always something clinging to that guy that, although I couldn't see it, I could feel it. Maybe it was the way he was looking at my little brother that set off my spidey senses or whatever, but the second I laid eyes on him, I got to praying that my grandpa would come back, quick. I don't even think about the fact that he might see the truck keys still in the ignition. I didn't think that he'd do anything crazy at all for that matter. So when he did, geez Louise, I just about freaked out in my skull. After talking to my brother with that devilish smirk on his face, he gets to looking around the inside of the truck, probably for something to steal or something. But then he sees the truck keys, how they're just dangling there in the ignition, and oh my God, the smile that appeared on his face was without a doubt the absolute most evil, predatory thing I've ever seen in my life. But even then, my first thought is, he's going to take Grandpa's truck. Like I really couldn't even fathom what he might actually have in mind. As the man started making his way around to the driver's side, I started telling my little brother, "Get out of the truck." He's all like, "Why?" And then I give him my big sister look and say, "That's a bad man, James. He wants Grandpa's truck." And immediately my little brother starts trying to undo the buckle of his safety belt. But the moment he even went to do it, it was like I could see the disaster unfolding before my eyes. My grandpa's truck was all beat up and hardly anything actually worked on it except the engine that made the thing scoot. And one of the things that notoriously didn't work was the safety belt release button on the passenger side. A lot of the times it was just kind of funny. Like I remember my dad not being able to undo it and being like, "Well, I guess this is my life now. I live in my dad's truck." But let me tell you, the time my little brother got stuck in the car and I thought that he was about to be abducted, completely terrifying. Like I said, I still didn't think that he wanted anything but Grandpa's truck, so I was just focused on getting my brother and me out of it so the evil grin guy could just drive off with it if he wanted to. But then as he opened the door and climbed into the driver's seat, he grabbed me by the arm so I couldn't get out. All the while my little brother is still struggling with the buckle. Then with that same evil smile on his face, a grin that said he'd been gifted with the one thing he wanted in the world, he said, "You two are my kids now." It hit me that me and my little brother were in way more trouble than we first thought, and I went into big sister overdrive to try and protect him. I remember how my grandpa kept a bunch of old tools underneath the front seat, mostly because his truck was just a mess, not out of any big desire to protect himself or stash a weapon or anything like that. Then even with the guy's hand wrapped around my arm, I had just enough wiggle room to reach underneath the seat and grab the first loose piece of metal I could find, which just so happened to be some kind of wrench. Then I came up and just started beating on the guy, stopping him from starting up the engine as he tried to stop me from hitting him. I remember being scared for me and my brother, but I also remember being scared that I might end up killing the guy or something, that I'd have to actually bash his brains in to be able to keep us safe. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I didn't want it to be happening at all, but my grandpa wasn't there to help, and I didn't think that he'd realize what was going on in time for him to stop it. Thankfully, he was wrong about that, as he and the clerk had noticed someone getting into his truck almost the moment it happened. So maybe only a couple of seconds after I started beating on the guy, my grandpa appears at the driver's side door and just starts dragging the guy out of the seat before throwing him onto the ground. Both me and my little brother were crying and hollering by this point, and I remember just throwing my arms around him and saying, "It's okay, we're okay now," as Grandpa just started beating the life out of this guy before he straight up sat on the guy and yelled at the gas station's clerk to call the police. I remember watching the clerk, how before he ran back into the gas station, he gave my grandpa this big old 6-shooter pistol, and although the guy was struggling on the ground at first with Grandpa sat on him, all it took was him pointing the gun at the guy's face, and he just stopped bucking and trying to hit Grandpa, and put his hands up above his head with a scared look on his face. Grandpa then told us to get out of the truck and go inside the gas station to wait with the clerk. I found out years later that Grandpa had actually planned on just killing the guy right there, and he didn't want us to see it. He didn't though, and somehow he found the restraint to just keep the gun aimed at his head until the sheriff and one of his deputies screamed into the gas station and took control of the situation. It was a huge deal back in the early 90s in our small town, as, like I might have mentioned already, there was basically no crime at all back then. Only other thing I can remember that caused as much of a stir was when 3 guys from Arkansas tried to start up a meth lab in our county, and it ended up exploding on them and causing this huge fire. Lots of people were saying last time anything this crazy happened was when ... and then they'd give either me or my little brother a look and then just stop talking. Had me thinking about what happened to us a lot around that time, and as I got older I realized more and more just how lucky we really were. My name is Emma. I'm from the UK, and I have a story I think you might be interested in. I've loved horses and ponies all my life, and whenever I can, I get out into the countryside to go pony trekking. This usually involves walking and trotting around a variety of forests here in England and Wales. Nothing too strenuous, and I usually find it to be a very relaxing and centering experience. But the last time I went, something happened that was actually one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. We were up in a place called Kielder Forest Park in Northumberland, and although we had some experienced guides with us, it was my first time up there. Kielder also has one of the longest pony tracks in the whole of the UK, which means you can literally ride for hours without having to loop back on yourself. I don't really mind having to repeat a trail. It's all the more time on a horseback, but it definitely does take a bit of the excitement away knowing that you're just going in circles. So with that in mind, you can understand why I was quite excited to get up there. Only about 2/3 into the ride, our ponies started to get a little bit skittish. Now, I know ponies can be some of the most temperamental creatures on earth, but if they don't like you or they're not in the mood to be ridden, they'll let you know as soon as you try to saddle them up. It's not like they get halfway into a ride and decide, "Forget this, I'm done." They also tend not to be scared of much, as they know a bite or a swift kick is the likely solution to any of their problems, and honestly, they'd be mostly right about that. So, as you can imagine, we were really confused when our ponies started freaking out on this section of track that was lined with trees. They seemed absolutely terrified, and for no discernible reason, it was so bad that at one point, my pony, Shamrock, actually tried to throw me off. I did everything I could, but nothing could calm her down. She was whinnying and doing 360s trying to spot whatever was scaring them. I was doing the same, but I saw absolutely nothing among the trees. You'd think the ponies would want to get out of the area if they were so scared, but they all just huddled together on the trail and refused to budge. In the end, we had to dismount and literally drag the ponies along the rest of the track, and one of the girls ended up getting a nasty kick from one particularly frightened pony, so naturally she was very upset. We were all quite shaken by the time we emerged from the trail, and one of the first things we asked the guides was what could have caused the ponies to freak out in such a way. Personally, I thought it might have been someone's dog running around the forest, then it could have been a domino effect with one pony after another getting spooked. But according to the guides, a border collie lived on the same farm the ponies were stabled at, so it's not like they weren't familiar with them. The guides rejected the idea that it was a fox or a badger scaring the ponies too. I mean, they really had no idea what it was, hence why they were just as freaked out as us, I suppose. I'm not saying that there was some bloody monster in the woods or something. I'm not one for ghost stories either. But sometimes I find myself wondering what exactly scared those poor ponies so much. We don't have bears or wolves or coyotes or mountain lions over here, and you're more at risk of a seagull attack than anything else in England. So what could have been out there, hiding among the trees, that could have scared the bejesus out of the ponies like that? I'd always thought our woods and forests here are pretty safe places to be, but maybe I was wrong. All I know is that I'm going to be much more careful in the future. So, I'm a bartender at a gentleman's club. Our uniform, if you can call it that, is a very short, skimpy black dress and black bra. Due to my uniform being the way it is, I do my best not to go out in public directly after work due to dirty looks or perverted comments that I just don't have time for. Back before the current state of the world, I had just gotten off of work. It was around 2:30 a.m., and I decided to run to my local Walmart to grab some dog food and other household items that I needed, thinking that there really wouldn't be anyone there besides staff. I ran in with a jacket to try and be a little modest and went directly to the pet aisle. There was a guy stocking the shelves. I gave a wave and smiled and proceeded looking for my dog's brand of food. I grabbed a 20-pound bag and the stalker asked if I needed help. I'm not a really small girl, but I have a slight frame. Like, I'm tall, but I have a small waist. I told him I was fine, but thanked him and headed to the grocery section. I was in the freezer section when my stalker showed up again, this time with another guy. They were just standing there watching me decide which pizza to pick, and when I turned to leave, the stalker asked me again if I needed help. I told him no, but thanked him again and smiled. I then made my way to the checkout aisle. On my way out, I saw a man heading out about 10 feet behind me. I quickly walked to my car, threw my purchases in the passenger side, and jumped in and locked my doors. I was worried that he would try and talk to me, and I just wanted to go home. I felt dumb after realizing the guy went to his own car and wasn't even near me, and started my 15-minute drive home. I was about halfway home when I noticed this black car behind me, taking all the same turns as me. I live in a rural area, and while it's possible he lived nearby, there aren't many people that take these roads. I turned a road after mine, and he made the same turn. It leads to a dead-end road with a cow farm, so I knew that he was following me. I get to the end of the road and do a quick 3-point turn and speed back out to the road, and he's still behind me. I called my boyfriend and told him what was going on and that I didn't want to drive home where he would know where we lived, and asked him to meet me at a Walmart. I speed the whole way there, hoping a cop is sitting somewhere and will pull us over. Black car guy is still directly on my butt, no matter how fast I was going. I pull into the Walmart parking lot and park under a street lamp. The black car pulls into the same spot across from mine, and I'm freaking out. About 15 seconds later, I see my boyfriend's truck, and he pulls in, more like drifts in, up next to me, and asks if I'm okay, and I point to the car. Now, my boyfriend is not a small man. He's about 6'4" and pretty large, like his arms are the size of my head. He's very intimidating, but a very quiet and kind individual. He gets out of his truck and starts to walk over to the car and yells to them, "You need to talk to her or something?" And the guy in the black car just backs out and takes off. I don't know if it was the same man that was at the store earlier or what, but I don't go out after work anymore. I'm in London in the UK. Currently, at the time that I'm writing this, we're in the Tier 4 lockdown. Stay in your home, only go out for shopping trips or exercise, no mixing with people outside of your own home and your own support bubble, etc. And with the current mutation rampaging through London, hospital beds are nearly at capacity and apparently the death tolls are starting to rise, and it made sense to stay indoors as much as possible. But every human being has a breaking point, and mine was 8 days of wandering around my one-bedroom apartment. I had talked myself out on Zoom and run out of conversations to talk to myself about. At 10 p.m., New Year's Eve, I decided to get some air, and which was allowed with the rules of Tier 4, and I go out for a quick walk around the perimeter around the local park, all on main roads, and it takes about 40 minutes. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store and pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. I step out with mask firmly affixed and started walking. One thing that I was not prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. On hindsight, a big mistake. Navigating myself through very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van, a Mercedes Sprinter size, and it turned in and rapidly approached me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by 2 men between the ages of 25 to 40 years of age. Then it stopped, window rolled down, and one man leaned out. "Hey friend, we're lost. Can you tell me where the station is?" And the accent was not from the UK, and I'm not going to state its origin as I'm not going to get into stereotypes, but alarm bells began to ring out immediately. What was a van doing out at this time, and why directions to the local train station in the middle of a lockdown? The van had stopped, so the side door was facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly. I didn't understand at all. I think it's best if you show us." With that, he opens his door, and the side door to the van opens to reveal another 2 men. I just turned and ran. I knew what was going on, and I ran down the side street that I had emerged from. Take the van around. Follow him," I heard them yell. Knowing that these guys were fitter, younger than I, a foot race to my apartment building was out of the question. The only advantage I had was a head start and hopefully local knowledge of the streets. The side street leads into a larger street that has homes, all with large hedges. I ran past a few homes and entered the front garden of a house that had the most imposing and opaque hedge. It was unlit. I ducked down. Lucky for me, that house did not have a motion sensor light. Within a few seconds, I could hear footsteps. They went past me and stopped. I peeked through the hedge vegetation with a very limited view to see the man who had asked for directions. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around, then the sound of the vehicle. I thought, oh no, the van. But luckily for me, it was a car. The man looked at his phone, looked around, pretending that he was just checking something, and then walked, leaving the residential street as quickly as possible, and the car continued its way. I waited for another 10 minutes, sitting behind the hedge in the front garden, practicing an explanation if the house lights came on. The house stayed unlit. And after my allotted time, I arose and quickly walked back to my apartment building, keeping to the shadows and reacting to almost every sound. I made it back, bolted the front door, and only when I sat down did I understand what I had just avoided. All this for some air and bottle of red. I poured myself a black coffee and debated calling the police. But what would I say? Had anything really happened that they could act on? Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not be a priority, especially in a night that they would be overstretched on. I just waited in the new year, realizing that I had a lucky escape and that I should stock up on red wine at a more decent time. So this happened to me at some point between the cusp of fall and winter last year, in 2019, and with no craziness rampaging through us yet. At the time, my husband and I both worked weekend night shift jobs, him at an IT service and me as a CNA in the local hospital's ICU. As we had no reason to be up and awake during the day, we lived a rather vampire-like schedule, sleeping all day and staying up all night. 4 days off, 3 12-hour shifts a week. It just worked. The best part about being a night dweller is the fact that you can go, or used to be able to go, in the middle of the night to do your grocery shopping. No lines, no hustle and bustle. You just go at your own leisure and dodge the occasional pallet of stock or graveyard shift worker who's filling up the shelves and probably wishing everyone present would quit taking things away right as he stocks them. But anyways, it's 2 a.m., peak energy time for me in the hubs. This Walmart is in a pretty decent part of town and everything's well lit, so I typically don't feel nervous walking around in the middle of the night. Hubs did tours in Iraq and has a good head on his shoulders, so even less reason to be concerned, right? Right. As we walk through the entrance, my eyes immediately drift towards the seasonal section. I have ADHD and am a pain to shop with according to Hubs, as I tend to wander off when something neat catches my attention. Unbeknownst to me, my hubby notices a small gaggle of young adults behaving rather immaturely, i.e. riding around in the electric handicap carts, intentionally smashing into displays, causing some general havoc. Oblivious to this all, I'm still wandering around while he patiently follows after, filling our cart here and there along the way. He sees these kid adults causing more trouble near the back of the store in the food almost shoes section, but once again, my attention was on more important things, like looking at the blind bag toys that I have absolutely no need for. We make it to the end of our shopping journey and head towards the self-checkout since they don't bother staffing the actual lanes in the middle of the night. While he scans in bags, I excuse myself to use the restroom and to go after a couple of Pokemon on my Pokemon Go game. I dilly-dally long enough that he's checked out and back at the car by the time I come out, so I make my way over to the compact SUV and modern-day station wagon that we own, where he's busy loading the groceries into the trunk. Hubs is very particular about how things are packed, which is fine by me, so we have a system. He loads, I return the cart to the cart holder thing. While I wait for him to finish loading, I hear a bunch of snickering and laughter coming from the car to the right of ours. So the cart in Hubs is between me and the other vehicle. I wasn't aware at the time, but these kid adults had been sitting in their car the entire time as he was unloading our spoils of war into the trunk, mocking and jeering at him for basic things, like what he's wearing on his shirt. It was a Pokemon logo if anyone cares, and other trivial things. Once I got there, however, all focus turned towards me. It took me a second to realize that they were actually addressing us, but soon I could make out what they were saying. They were laughing at my husband, asking him if he actually censored a whale like me. Now, I'm no string bean by a long shot. I have some decent curves going on. So they honed in on my size and appearance. In my defense, does anyone really dress up to go to Walmart at 2 a.m. and encourage each other to keep throwing pot shots in our direction at the fact we were together, anything they could think of to make fun of us with? Being the sensitive, self-conscious soul that I am, I could already feel my eyes start to water. I figured that we would just finish what we were doing and leave them behind in their gloating and foolishness, but Hubs wasn't going to have any of it. It was one thing, according to him, for them to mock him, but when they started being cruel about me, he'd hit his limit. He's truly a non-violent man, but he was so riled up by what they were saying that he balled up his fist, raised his voice, and told them to shut up with a decent smack against their side window, which had rolled up upon Hub's approach. My knight in shining armor coming to my defenses, I thought. That action caused a series of quick, chaotic reactions. The young men, 3 of them, started angrily yelling, and I distinctly heard one of them ask the other if he wanted his gun, to which the ringleader said, "Yeah, give it." Holy pokeballs, I thought. I tell my Hubs to get in the car and, in a panicked rush, decided to abandon the shopping cart in front of their car in hopes of creating an obstacle for them. I fling myself into the SUV, and by this point, one young man has started smacking on the hood of our car while another steps behind it trying to block us in. I vividly remember through my blurry vision seeing a young woman in the backseat of their vehicle, looking somewhat embarrassed as she mouthed, "I'm sorry," in my direction. No time to think about that, not with the ringleader appearing from the car at any moment. Hubs pulls the car in reverse, and the young man behind us had no choice but to move, lest he become a human pancake. Hubs drives off out of the parking lot like a bat out of heck, and it's clearly evident that my cart obstacle did little to delay them, as their Dodge Dart was right on our tail, flying down the road right behind us. We made it through one green light before they caught up to us, sidling up in the lane next to us as I'm trying to remember to breathe, thoughts going on in 100 different directions. Thanks, ADHD brain. I see the passenger window roll down and out comes a hand with a gun, pointed right in my, or rather, Hub's direction. I screamed something to the effect of them having a gun, though I'm sure it came out as incoherent shrieking in actuality. Hubs got the point though and chose, in that moment, to swerve directly at them with our vehicle, leaving them no choice but to drive onto the median or be hit by a bigger vehicle going 70 to 80 miles an hour. They swerved, which slowed them down, so Hubs hit the gas and kept driving, ignoring red lights along the way. Finally pulling myself together, I dialed 911 on my cell phone, and since the police station wasn't exactly nearby, the operator arranged to have some cops meet us at a local church a mile or 2 from where we currently were. Hubs keeps driving forward, car still at our heels, and he somehow managed to swerve a turn in the middle of the intersection while making it look like we intended to go forward. Other car flies on while we tail it to the cops at the church. They took down our statements and sent a few cars out to try to find them. I was completely useless when it comes to details, but Hubs came through to save the day and could tell them the make, model, color of the car and describe details about the individuals. All I could remember in my mind was the face of the girl who mouthed the "I'm sorry," and lo and behold, I kid you not, one of the officers took us to his car, flipped through his fancy police computers, and the on-screen pops the image of the same girl I'd seen in the Walmart parking lot. Another click, and the same young men, save for one, were the one put on the screen. Apparently these upstanding citizens had been confronted by the police department only nights prior. I wish I could remember the charges, but my mind was overwhelmed by that point. Most of the details are a blur, like my mind intentionally tried to redact things to protect itself or something. Now, needless to say, I developed genuine anxiety about going to Walmart in the middle of the night after that. Thankfully, we both transitioned into daytime jobs since then, so we share the pain of daywalkers' normal grocery store woes these days. At the time of the story, I had just finished my 6th grade year and was very athletic and took runs every day. This encounter occurred in the summer, and what comes with summer? Heat. So instead of running in the day when it was hotter, I began running in the evening when the sun was going down. On the day of the encounter, I followed my normal routine. I told my mom I was going to start my run and then began to listen to my music on my iPod Shuffle. Now, the way my neighborhood works is that there is only one entrance, which doubles as the only exit as well. I live in a suburban area, so the main road that passes the entrance of my neighborhood isn't very busy, but it isn't empty either. On the day, I was running down the main road of my neighborhood that all the small streets branch off of. I was close to the entrance and could clearly see all the cars passing by. I'm also clearly visible to all cars passing by. And I remember watching this gray Honda car slam on its brakes at the entrance on my neighborhood. This was done so fast and so hard that I heard the tires squeal over the song that I was listening to at full volume. I brushed it off as someone following directions that most likely nearly missed my neighborhood's entrance. The car began up the road I was running on, going extremely slow, at least 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. I could make out 3 shadows in the car through the darkness and a little light from the house porch lights, 2 at the front of the car and some in the back seat. As I passed the car, I saw the driver's side window was down. I gave the car a smile and a wave, and I turned down a small street that branched off the road I was running on. Now, I remember feeling extremely on edge as I checked over my shoulder. I saw the car turn around in the middle of the road and then slowly down the street that I was running on. Again, I chalked it up to misinterpreting directions and trying not to think too much of it, and I really began to freak out. As a girl of my age, I always would jump to the worst possible outcome. I wasn't very tall and only stood about 5'2", so I knew that I could be easily mishandled if the people in the car had any ill intentions. But I knew that was very unlikely, so I tried to tell myself to calm down. I reached the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, so I was now running on the opposite side of the car. They were still going very slowly, and what I do next may have saved my life, and I can't imagine what would have happened if I didn't. As the car and I were about to be right next to each other, I paused my music and kept my earbuds in, giving the illusion that I was still listening. As the car and I got closer, I heard the 2 men speaking. One of them actually tried to speak to me, yelling "hey" or something like that to get my attention, but I didn't reply because I knew that it would blow my cover and that they would know that I was able to hear them. As the car drove a little bit behind me and out of my view, I heard one of them say, "We'll get her when we turn back around." I froze. Get me? I felt like something dumped a bucket of freezing water on my head. I knew they had to go around the cul-de-sac, so I did the only thing I could think of. I instantly sprinted. As I ran down the street, I looked over my shoulder and saw the car had already went around the cul-de-sac and was now going a lot faster after me. I turned into the main road of my neighborhood and ran. I passed my street and just ran as fast as I could towards the end of my neighborhood. My house was the first in my street, so I knew that they would see where I lived if I tried to go home. I was scared to death and essentially running for my life. I had no idea what I could do to get away from these people, so I just pushed my body to go as fast as possible. I continued to check over my shoulder, hoping maybe they wouldn't be there, but they were. They were right behind me, and I distinctly remember they were silent. I'd imagined them yelling at each other that I was going to get away, but they were chasing me in silence. To me, that was creepier than if they would be yelling. When I ran down the last street in the neighborhood, I started running through backyards. That was the only thing I had left to do. I heard the car slam on its brakes, turn off its engine, and 3 doors slam. My heartbeat sped up. I was so convinced that they were going to begin chasing after me through those backyards. "Get back in the car. We won't find her like this." My heart dropped as I heard 3 doors shut and the car engine start up again. Now that I was running through backyards, I would have to run across the streets too. This is the scariest part for me because I would be very visible to the people in the car if they were going to be driving down the main road. I remember staring at the street trying to decide whether or not I should try to wait it out or if I should just book it home. I went with book it home. I didn't even check my shoulder as I ran through backyards, jumped over fences, and ran across the streets. I was just waiting for car lights to light up the area around me or for arms to wrap around me, but thankfully it never happened. Somehow the car must have turned down the wrong streets or completely missed me, and I truly believe that it's the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. When I got to my house, I wasted no time jumping through the door. Once I slammed my door shut, I sat on the ground and thought about what had just happened and what could have happened. I never ended up telling my parents until years later, and I didn't call the police. But if they are still out there, I hope they're locked up somewhere so they can't ever terrorize a child again. I can't imagine what they would have done to me if they ever caught me. And needless to say, I hope I never see them again. Years ago, I was on my way to Minneapolis, Minnesota from Boondock, Egypt, Minnesota. I was making the trip alone. I drove as much as I could handle, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. It was late at night and I decided to call it quits when I stopped in this little nothing town called Rothsay. I checked into this little motel to regroup for the night and decided to bebop on over to this 24-hour truck stop for some food. It wasn't far, so I grabbed my coat out of my car and went over on foot. So some background about me. I have always been super cautious about stranger danger. My mom was into true crime and drilled it into me that any situation could be dangerous, so I need to stay vigilant and be prepared in case any sort of altercation happens with a creep. I always watch the people around me when I'm out and pay attention to what's going on. When this happened, I had pepper spray clipped on the inside breast pocket of my leather and my stun gun, machete, and baton in my car just in case stuff like this incident were ever to go south. I also had 2 gas cans, jumper cables, vehicle fluids, etc. in my car in case of an emergency. I felt okay with being myself because of all of this. To anyone who saw me, I was an 18-year-old female traveling by myself in a dumpy '02 Ford Vic with out-of-state plates. And if they bothered to look into it specifically with a county number of a town with a population of like 600 to 700. So to creeps with bad intentions, I obviously had potential of being a vulnerable target on which to pull some nonsense with. I still was friendly with strangers and willing to help anyone in need, but this incident made me a bit leery about it from then on. I really feel like something awful would have went down if it had not been for the red flags that I saw and me questioning my situation. I stopped putting myself out there like this after it happened. While I was walking to that truck stop, I noticed a parked car with the door open and some dude just half sitting in it smoking a cigarette and messing with stuff in the car. I took note because he looked at me and kind of put off sketchy vibes. A lady, maybe 30 years old, comes out of the truck stop and approached me. She was a little off, like I'm fairly sure she was an addict and was high at the time. I was an addict once and don't look down on them, so I greeted her kindly when she walked up to me, and she said, "I am stranded here and need help. My car just died and I think I ran out of gas." So I told her that I'd be glad to help and offered to put 25 in the tank, and she said the car wasn't here. It had died on the road. I was like, okay, no problem. I always keep gas cans and jumper cables in case of something like this, so no worries. I could give her one of my gas cans and take gas back to it. And she responds, "Can I get a ride to my car?" So I asked her where it was, and she responds, "Oh, not that far, I suppose. It would just be nice to get a ride. Will you take me to my car?" I told her I was actually about to head into the truck stop to get something to eat just now, but it would be no problem at all to let her take a gas can. She floundered and changed it to, "Well, I'm not sure if it's out of gas. It could have just died because of the bad battery. You said you have cables, so would you try to jumpstart my car?" Odd thing is, the whole time I was talking to her, she kept glancing over at the dude in the car. She seemed insistent that I get in my car and take her somewhere. And these things just clicked. Alarms went off in my mind, and I knew that there was no way I was giving this woman a ride anywhere. So many red flags, and at this point, I felt like it was some sort of scam to maybe rob me or steal my car or something of that sort, just due to how sketchy she was being. And because she kept looking over at the guy in the car throughout this, I did wonder if maybe she was afraid of the man for some reason, maybe in a bad relationship and trying to get away from him. I don't know. I made one last-ditch attempt on the off chance that she really did need help, and I told her that I'd let her use my phone if she wanted to call someone. But I wasn't going to give her a ride, with my excuse being that I had just driven all the way from 2 states over and I was going inside to get food. Honestly, I just felt weird about the whole thing and didn't want to give her what she wanted. She 180'd so fast. She started screaming and swearing at me, saying all kinds of terrible stuff and making a huge scene, so I threw up my hands and said, "Fine, sorry, I can't help you." And I walked away from her and went inside the truck stop. The woman hung around the lot a few minutes, and as I was eating my caramel roll, I saw her leaving the lot with the man who had been sitting in the car smoking a cigarette. I was certain that it was a ruse, because why bother if she could have just met with him? I mentioned it to a lady inside, and she said she saw the strange lady show up there with the man that she left with, and she thought it was also super creepy and unsettling, and it was very likely that they had bad intentions. I genuinely feel like she was right, and my gut feeling was right. I feel like the point was for the strange woman to talk me into giving her a ride and direct me somewhere for the man to follow in his car for evil reasons. A few years back, I was working as a Lyft driver in some of my free time to make a little extra cash, but this experience happened when I was not expecting rides, ultimately confirming some of the horror stories you might hear. One evening, as I was headed home from my day job, I stopped at a Walmart to grab a couple of essentials before getting home. While I didn't have the driver app operating, therefore not accepting rides at that moment, I still had the stickers in my windows indicating that I was a driver. After paying for my things, I headed to my car and began putting my things in the trunk. Almost out of nowhere, a woman approached me. She looked distressed and a little disheveled, but no warning flags necessarily jumped out at me quite yet. She asked if I was the Lyft driver she requested, and I replied politely that I was not. Almost cutting me off, she began pleading with me to give her a ride down the street, stating that her sister was in serious trouble and she needed to get to her as soon as she could. Feeling empathetic for her situation, I tried asking what had happened, and she blurted back that her sister was in trouble, but avoided my actual question. Although I felt bad for the woman, I began getting a little suspicious of her story. As nicely as I could, I told her that I don't do rides outside of the app, to which she replied, "It's just down the street a few blocks. I can pay you more than the app would, please." I began backing up towards my door as I continued to tell her sorry that I wouldn't be able to help at this time, blaming the perishables in my trunk. At this time, I was not focused on the warning signs necessarily, as I did feel empathetic to her situation. That is until her phone buzzed and she glanced at it quickly, almost in a way so I couldn't see her phone. Odd, I thought to myself. When she slipped the phone back into her pocket is when I saw how clunky and small the phone was, and clearly was not a smartphone that could have been used to order a lift. I apologized again and tried not to clue her in that warning bells had gone off in my head. I told her, "Well, hopefully your lift arrives soon and everything's fine with your sister." I got in my car quickly. Luckily, my car has a feature where if you only click unlock once, the driver's side is the only door to unlock. Not that she attempted to open a door, but it did make me feel safer with that feature in this moment. As I backed up my car out of the spot, she moved hastily out of the way, and I noticed that her face changed from distressed to what I can only describe as malice. As I got to the end of the aisle, waiting for cars to pass so I could merge and get out of the Walmart lot, I glanced in the rear-view mirror as 2 men got out of the Escalade that had been parked adjacent to me and approached the woman as if angry or annoyed with her, and I could see her angrily gesturing toward my car and turned to face them as they continued arguing about something. Finally, I was able to pull out of the aisle just as she followed them back into the Escalade. I work at a retail store that sells parts, feed, and the like. On a slow night, the store manager and I were closing, but it was pretty slow, so he let me go home early. I jumped at this opportunity as I have 2 jobs that are extremely physically demanding and I'm always tired. It's important for you to know that I've been borrowing my brother's car. My mother stole my own car, long story for another subreddit, and this car has many electrical issues. I'll get into that in a moment. My drive home is 45 minutes, and it's on those country roads you may have heard songs about. Sure, they're great, but there are no streetlights. Don't get me started about the quality of the asphalt either. So I'm in this little Kia, which all the gauges and speedometer needles jump around on the dash depending on the humidity and temperature. Lucky me. And I have to manually keep track of how much gas is left in the tank by simply doing the math. The gauge cannot be trusted. I guess I messed up that week because on my way home from work that night, the car just started to sputter and just died right there. The electrical was okay, but the engine just quit. I'd been texting my other manager throughout the shift. He and I had become friends. He was close to my age, had similar interests, and was cute. But I had shared that our store manager had let me go early. So I texted him and said, "Hey, what if I told you I was stuck on the side of the highway?" Now you may be wondering, why didn't I text this brother that I've spoken of, or why I didn't call another friend? This is because, number one, I knew this manager lived close by and would absolutely be the guy to lend a helping hand. Number two, my brother turned his ringer off at 8 p.m. so he wouldn't even answer. And number three, my brother and I had just moved to this state and at the time had not made friends with anyone yet. My manager texted back, "Hang on, for real? Do you need help?" As I was typing a reply, a green Dodge Ram drove up, something like that. A little beat up, but with a nice new set of LED headlights and a light bar on the top. Their high beams and light bar were on, so I couldn't see their faces, and as far as I could tell, at least 2 men were inside. The driver's window rolled down and I hear an accented voice call out, "Hey, beautiful, are you okay? How about you hop in the truck, we'll take good care of you." I'm a 5'10", 22-year-old woman who, in work boots, is about 6 feet tall. I'm not as built as I was in high school, just athletic enough to handle someone my own size, but not 2 grown men. I had gotten out of my car to go see if I could tell where the nearest landmark was, but I couldn't, so I had walked back to my car at this point. I stood there with my feet planted. I reached behind my belt, above my rear end, in an attempt to appear as if though reaching for a gun, which I did not have. Foolish? Maybe. Desperate? Absolutely. I pointed up the road with my left arm and said in the meanest girl voice I could, "Get the F out of here." Somehow it worked. I have no idea, but it did. The truck sped off like it couldn't get away fast enough, which made me laugh now. I called the police and told them roughly where I was, which took some figuring out since I was so new to the area. Maps wasn't helping a ton. I then called my manager to tell him what had happened. He got there before the cops did, with a full gas can. Turned out, he was literally around the corner at a friend's house watching the game, and his friend had a gas can. I later got to meet this guy and his girlfriend. They were very sweet people. He said it was perfect timing, as he had turned down a weekend trip with a friend, and this other friend randomly invited him over just 2 hours before this went down. He poured all the gas he had into my car, which started nicely, and followed me to the nearest station and paid for the rest of my tank. He also bumped my car door closed, locking me out, so we had to wait for a tow truck for 3 hours. Definitely a funny way to end the night. We sat on the back of his tailgate and talked the whole time, and I even broke down crying after the adrenaline had gone down a bit. He held me by my shoulders and assured me that I was safe. We actually had some good laughs that night, which made it very memorable. He told me he admired my ability to see the humor in the situation and how I didn't let it get to me. We've been dating for 5 months now, and I'm almost glad that I almost got kidnapped. I live 10 minutes away from Walmart, but I honestly rather drive 45 minutes to the next town's Walmart. The Walmart by me is just unpleasant. My brother and I one day decided to just go because we needed something quick and was short on time. We went and browsed the electronics section. Sometimes they do have cool stuff. With nothing found, I browsed the computers while my brother quickly looked at LED lights. As I started walking away, I noticed a tall man with white gray hair walking super close to an older lady. I thought that they knew each other. When I passed him, he got super close behind me. My eyes bugged out of my head because I knew how close he was as my older brother looked behind him because I was walking towards him. His eyes bugged, so I knew I wasn't just imagining it. He got so oddly close that I decided to turn around to see who he was, and I didn't recognize him, and darted inside the next aisle where my brother came up behind me and said that I should keep walking, that he's right behind us. Next to electronics, the next aisle is the art and craft supply. We kept walking. My brother peered behind us, and he loudly whispered, "Oh my God, he's still following us. Go, go." So we made it to automotive, which was the main reason of the visit to Walmart, which I was relieved when there was more people around than there was in the electronics. After getting what we needed, we made our way back to electronics to pay. It was over 20 minutes since we'd last seen that Danny Phantom-looking guy. As we turned the corner, we see the guy again. Eyes darted right at me as I tried to ignore it. The ladies at the electronics looked a bit off, and I noticed them speaking Spanish. I picked up that they called security because that guy was just standing there. Meanwhile, in line to pay, security comes and asks this guy if he was waiting on someone, and he replied no, and turned away. After we paid, I told my brother that this is why I don't shop around here. As we walked to the front of the store, the same guy was following us out. We ran to the Jeep and locked the doors. My brother described his eyes as these predatory hunting eyes, just dead and soulless. I don't know what happened after we left, but I now don't shop anywhere near my home to avoid the weirdos of my city, and I'm fairly certain that human trafficking happens at that Walmart often. This took place when I was about 17. I'm a female. I moved in with my brother and sister-in-law into their apartment in the city. I'll admit I was a very innocent 17-year-old. I still had a lot to learn about the world and what people were capable of. I worked the evening shift at my job, and they let me stay in their spare room while I saved up to get my own place. They used the living room as their bedroom because their other rooms were too small, so when I got home from work, I either had to park around the back of the building and go in the back door, or park on the street out front and walk through an alleyway to get to the back door. One night, I got home from work and decided I wasn't ready for sleep yet. It was about 2 a.m. and I was still amped up from work, so I poured myself a drink and walked around to the front of the building to sit on the front steps and enjoy the night air before bed. While I was sipping my drink, listening to some music on my headphones, someone called out of the building next door and sat down on their steps. It was a young man around my age. After a few moments, he started to talk to me. I realized he was pretty drunk, but seemed harmless, so we chatted for a few minutes. He started telling me a story about how he chased some guy with a machete. Start cueing all the red flags. Then his friend also came out and also sat on the steps. His friend was fully wasted. Gonzo, if you know what I mean. Just sitting there holding his head in his hands. So I said, "Well, I better get going now. Have a good night." And I stood up to walk through the alleyway between the two buildings. I was nervous about going through there, but I was either that or walk all the way down the street and around the block to get to the back of the building. So I said goodnight and started walking through the alleyway to get to the back door, trying to stay calm and not appear freaked out. I look behind me and realize that the drunk guy is following me through the alleyway. He says to me, "Where you going?" I said, I have to go home." And he responds, "You gonna leave me without a kiss goodnight?" I say to him, "I don't know you." And he says, "Come on, just one kiss." At this point, I'm starting to get nervous about where this is going when he snags his jacket on a nail in the alleyway, and I use this moment to make my way out of the alley into my door. He unsnags himself and catches up to me at the back door, asking if he can come in. Mind you, I've never met this guy in my life. I tell him, "I'm sorry, my brother and sister-in-law are asleep." I slowly close the door while he stands there staring drunkenly at me, half expecting this to go sideways. The way I figure, that night could have gone two ways. I was super relieved it ended with him on the other side of the door and me safely in my own house. I never saw him again, and I never went out at night by myself to sit on the front steps. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Potentially dangerous situations can creep up on you. You don't always see them coming until they're following you through a dark alley. Try not to put yourself in those situations and anticipate the creepy. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel members. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, want some jelly beans?
So my husband's dad is the VP of operations for a company that employs truck drivers for delivery. Anytime a driver hits brakes, speeds excessively, swerves, or anything like that, a camera automatically records just before to just after the incident. It's always on and running, but only records when an unsafe event occurs, and that footage is automatically uploaded and my father-in-law views it. There are two cameras. One of them records the driver and one faces the road. He basically determines whether disciplinary action needs to be taken if the driver is driving inappropriately. Now, my father-in-law received a video last spring, and I'm going to describe the events for you. Two truck drivers were driving down a two-lane road late at night, early morning. It's pitch black outside, but they see something ahead on the road. As they get closer, you can actually see a female in a white dress walking in their lane. The person turns around to look at them as they pass through or by them. But what the video doesn't show is that they stop and jump out because they don't believe there is any way that they didn't hit this girl. They don't see anyone in the road, no one is in the ditch, no blood or evidence of anyone was there in fact. They were still convinced though that they'd hit someone, so they called the police. The police showed up to write a police report and investigate, but found nothing upon searching the surrounding area. Some research was done into the area, and it actually turns out that in 2013, a girl was walking in the road there and was killed when struck by two vehicles. My father-in-law is not tech-savvy by any means, so he logged into his corporate account on my husband's laptop, and we helped him download the video. Unfortunately, for legal reasons, I'm not allowed to share the video, but I did take some screen grabs for you guys to look at. In the video, you can actually see that there are two cones that have the shoulder blocked off, which didn't allow them to swerve out of the way. You can see them approaching the woman who was walking in their lane. You can see their reactions before and after passing the lady, and the speed that they were traveling at too. I have the screen grabs of internal emails discussing the event, and the subject line is the ghost incident, but I 100% can't post those. But the entire incident has them in a tizzy, for a lack of a better term. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the pictures, and it's a weird one for sure. So this happened to me about 5 years ago, during which I was working at an after-school music studio teaching private lessons. The building I worked in was an old walk-up, one of the oldest buildings in the town in fact, and supposedly it was haunted, according to my boss anyway. Almost all of my co-workers had really strange experience late at night at that studio, while closing up or on their own and whatnot. I had some pretty strange experiences as well, hearing people fiddling around with a piano when there was no one in the room, hearing footsteps and people talking when I was the only one there. stuff like that. I've always been sensitive to these things, so it actually didn't freak me out that much. I just assumed that it was some spirit or energy that was still in the building, and I ignored it, most of the time anyway. However, one night, I had just finished my last lesson of the evening and I was closing up. I was the last teacher there, and there was just something very eerie about the feeling in the building that night. I felt as if somebody was genuinely in the room with me and was watching my every move. I got my stuff and hustled out of the building as quickly as I could. But driving back home, I just couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was in the car with me. I had never felt that before, but I felt as if whatever it was in that building felt lonely or something, and maybe it attached itself to me. As usual, I took it off and I tried not to think about it for the rest of the night. The next morning, my boyfriend had left for work early as usual, around 6 o'clock, and I got up later in the morning, 8:30, to get ready for my day. I step into the shower and immediately I feel a person's presence just so strongly. This thought pops into my head that this person in here is watching me shower. I know that sounds insane, but I just felt it so intensely. So out loud, I decided to yell, "Please leave me alone." And immediately, I heard my front door slam. Not my bathroom door, but my front door. And then I no longer felt this person's presence. I finished my shower, dried off, and I decided to take a look at my front door entrance, and I saw the scariest thing that I think that I've ever seen in my life. 2 wet footprints right in front of that door. This really did happen, and I've tried to reason it away and find logical explanations, but nothing has made sense so far. I genuinely believe that this was a spirit, and it got a little bit too close for comfort, let's say, and decided to pop in the shower with me that morning. I, a 23-year-old female, grew up in a rural area in Ontario. It was the kind of place where you never really lock your doors because, well, you know everyone in town. The all-too-trusting small-town mentality stayed with me once I moved to a big city for university. I got an apartment in a student area with a college nearby and plenty of bars within walking distance. I lived with a guy friend, Roddy, who was a few years older than me from the same small town. I would go to the bar with friends on the weekends and stumble home by myself around 2 a.m. One night, on my way home, my neighbor Kyle and I met in the hallway, both headed to our own places. He was also drunk and so good-looking. He said hello and invited me inside, and I ended up staying the night with him. He was nice, and it was a fun night, if not a little bit awkward. We didn't exchange numbers, and it didn't seem like he cared for anything to come of it, so I went home in the morning, and that was that. Fast forward to 2 days later, though. I was asleep in my bed, and my roommate was half asleep on the couch with the TV on, and he heard a sound that might have been the door creaking open, but he ignored it in his tired state. A few minutes later, he opened his eyes to see a naked man standing in front of him, lifeless and staring into his eyes. It was Kyle. Roddy tried to talk to him and ask him what the heck he was doing here, but he didn't respond. Roddy ran to my room and said, I think Kyle is here to see you. So I followed him out into the living room and saw a completely naked Kyle staring at us with the most serious and concentrated eyes that I had ever seen. I tried to talk to him and ask him to leave, but once again he just didn't respond. Instead, he went into our kitchen and opened the fridge. He proceeded to take our butter out and started smearing it all over his face and chest, saying nothing, and still with a completely serious look on his face. Roddy and I just ran to my bedroom to talk about what to do. While we were in the room, Kyle walked down the dark hallway that led to us and stood in the dark right before the light of my room could reach him. All you could do was see his silhouette, and he started whispering just my name over and over again, repeatedly. Roddy and I ended up calling the police and staying in my room until they came and took him back to his house. They said that he must have been on drugs, but probably wasn't a threat. I agreed too, and I didn't think that he was a threat, but I didn't sleep well that night knowing that he was a thin wall away from us in this apartment. I should add here as well that I talked to Kyle about a week later, and he had no memory of doing this, but he did call 911 on himself and got an ambulance to the hospital the next morning because he had severe sunstroke, so it was likely sunstroke-induced delirium or something. He's okay now, thankfully, but anyway, that was probably the cause of that. But we forgot to lock our doors another time. I was at work and Roddy was at home. I got a text from him that said, "Please get home. Someone is here and I think you must know them because I don't." So I took an early lunch and came home to see what was going on. There was a man with greasy black hair so long that it nearly reached his elbows. He was pacing back and forth in our living room, and before I even got a chance to speak to him, I realized that he was definitely not mentally present. He would alternate between screaming at the top of his lungs like he was being murdered, and then he would cry and say things like, "I can feel the pain and suffering of everyone in the world. I can hear the voices of the poor and the tormented in my brain begging me to help them. I can't stand this suffering. Nobody understands my powers and ability to know what everyone is thinking." I would chime in to politely ask, "Do you know where you are, or what is your address? I can help you get home." And then he would scream at us because this was his house and he wasn't leaving. He wanted us to stop judging him. After about 10 minutes of him rambling and pacing, he finally said his address to us, which was actually the neighboring apartment where Kyle lived. I knew Kyle had a roommate that I met, John, but apparently this was their third roommate. I went to his door and knocked, and thankfully, the roommate John opened the door and came to retrieve the rambling man. Later that night, John knocked on our door and I opened it to see him holding a bottle of wine. He wanted to thank us for handling the situation well and making sure that he got home. Apparently, the man had recently been in a mental hospital and left on his own accord and walked into the wrong apartment. His parents came and got him, and he's back in hospital now, safe and sound, thankfully. But to have two people from the same apartment do such strange things just by coming over randomly and acting so bizarre, it certainly got me worried. My unit in the US Army was deployed to Iraq in April of 2006. We were in Ramadi. It was 123 kilometers, 77 miles out of Baghdad. I was in my Humvee, headed to Baghdad for emergency leave due to a death in my family. It was close to midnight. The Humvee that I was in had 3 others and a turret gunner. The 2 other Humvees had the same 5 total people, one in front, one in back. I was without a weapon due to my leave. The Humvee in front stopped hard, and we all figured that it was a possible IED or VB IED. The team leader in our HV radioed the lead HV, and the convo went something like this. "Hey, what's up? Why did you stop? Hey, something flew in front of the HV." "What? Flew in front of the HV?" "Yeah." "Well, we didn't see anything." And the third HV piped in with, "Hey, does anyone hear that hello?" Yeah, but I don't see it. Did the other 2 vehicles?" And just then in the desert off the highway was a black figure, and it looked like a huge bird. It looked like maybe smoke was emitting from it. A blackish, greenish smoke with a bit of a blue tinge. We all focused our eyes. The 2 troops with better nods, night vision, could see something, but couldn't make out what it was. The smoke was apparently distorting the view. And within a second or 2, a rock was thrown at one of the Humvees. A big rock too, like the size of somebody's head. We used a spotlight, and in that light, something just flew straight up, and it was loud. And then we I heard what I can only describe as a loud screeching noise. Within a minute, it was over, but we all just sort of sat there in a state of shock, curiosity, and panic. And I mean, what the heck was that? When we got back to Baghdad, the translator that we were picking up to bring to the Marines, he was there with us. And he said that it sounded like we encountered an Ifrit. A team leader said, "A what?" And he said, "An Ifrit, a winged jinn." We were all a bit speechless. We chose not to disclose to our command the winged thing and instead just described it as battle fatigue. It was well known that PTSD was a career killer at this juncture. It's been 13 years since this happened. I met my now husband in 2015, and he had also been deployed to Ramadi with my sister unit at the time, and he had went through this particular stretch of the highway on his mid-deployment leave. He recounted a similar story to me, and it was enough to stop me in my tracks. It was actually pretty close to mine, except they didn't stop, they just sort of boogied on through. Considering the time we were there for was pretty deadly, including an aid station manned by soldiers that was ambushed and blown to bits. I was a medic, so death was my norm at the time. But I still can't wrap my mind around it. And now, apparently the last two places I live in, something seems to have followed us. I might share those stories another time, but for now, I'll leave it here. This happened a few nights ago, and I just really can't stop thinking about it. Now, I work in the criminal justice system, and I see a lot of crime, and am also naturally a follower of subreddits, scary movies, and scary stories in general. So I kind of have to disclaim that I do have a heightened sense of paranoia sometimes. That I'll admit happily. But my girlfriend and her roommate both agreed that this was just really weird. So I was out walking my girlfriend's roommate's dog as she was working a night shift in their neighborhood, which is a very safe suburb of New York. I walked across the parking lot into this field in the middle of a rotary, or a roundabout, whatever you call them. I lived in Boston for a while, and they call them rotaries there, and was just sort of screwing around in Reddit since it was nearing midnight and in the middle of quarantine and there were no cars out. The dog has a long leash, and so she was sniffing around, and then I kind of saw her stop and stare towards the road. I looked up, and I saw a black SUV stopped in the rotary. I pulled on my COVID mask that was on my chin. Since nobody was around, I had it sort of half off, as some people in New York are pretty touchy about that. Understandably too, just in case they stopped to lecture me, and I didn't care to engage in a dumb argument. I looked back at my phone and then back at the SUV that was still there. There was a family, mother, father in the front, and a 12-year-old daughter in the back seat, and I was a bit startled because they were all just sort of blankly staring directly at me. I sort of waved and nodded and started walking the dog a bit around the grass again, and they started to slowly move. They came around the rotary, and I looked back, and all of them were again staring directly at me. I figured that they may talk to me, so I stopped and waited for them to sort of get around the circle, but when they approached, they kept driving very slowly or staring directly at me still. I gave another half wave, and they drove past me, still slowly and staring, back around the circle, and then again around the circle. Literally all of them blanket staring at me, even the little girl in the back seat. I put my arms up in like a shrugging gesture as if to say, "What are you guys doing?" They did this a couple more times, and I started to walk up to the edge of the circle to engage. Normally something I would not do, but it was a family, so I sort of felt a bit more brave to do so. They sped up a bit and went around the corner and turned off the rotary. I started to feel even weirder, so I decided that I would walk back to her apartment building when they entered the rotary again. I was sort of watching them out of the corner of my eye, and they were still staring. I started picking up the pace, and they turned off the rotary towards me and picked up the pace as they followed me. Once again, I got to the sidewalk, and I turned around because I didn't want them to know which door I was walking into. It's on a strip mall with a few other apartment buildings and stores. And they stopped about 30 feet behind me, and they were all staring out the front window. The little girl was in the center seat, now staring too. I once again raised my arms to be like, "Can I help you?" And no response at all from them. I just kind of stood there with no movement and took my phone back out and typed their license plate into a notepad. Again, a weird thing that I do, probably because of my work in criminal defense and general paranoia, not really knowing what I would do with it. Then they slowly turned to the other side of the parking lot, all still staring until they got to the end of the lot, and I rushed into the apartment building, which luckily needs a code to enter. I got up and I told my girlfriend, and then her roomie in the AM, and they both were kind of freaked out. I watched them out of a window too, and they pulled back up to where I was standing on the sidewalk and just sat there in their car for some time. I couldn't see them at this point, but the roof of their car, and it felt like maybe 10 minutes that they just sort of sat there, and then they just slowly drove away. I really just can't stop thinking about their creepy stare at me too, because somehow it made it creepier that it was just a normal looking family with a young daughter. If it was like two younger guys, I could have marked it off as if they were bored and just screwing with me, but this was just blank, unmoving expressions that made it so creepy. So I usually take my dog for a walk every day. Today my dad said that he was going to the gym, so I decided to take the dog for a walk while he was still there. So I lock the door and leave, going on my usual route. On my way, I pass a large section of forest or bush. I don't know what to call it. I've always noticed a path that leads into the bushes though, but I've never bothered with it because the usual walk is already long enough. But today I decided that I would because I wanted to see new places to walk, and my dad would be out for quite a while. I really don't like being home alone, so I thought, well, why not? So I start going along this path, and it just seemed like a normal bushwalk, really fun. At that point, I thought that I might actually go there again, in fact, tomorrow or whenever I walked him next. So I'm walking along this path for about a minute or two until I came to what I thought was a dead end, because the path ended and there was bush coming up to my knees where the path would have continued. So I go to turn around and head back, and I see something moving. It's in the deep bushes, not too far from the knee-high bush, and about 10 meters away from me, I would say. From what I could see too, it had really long, thin arms. It was pale. It looked like it was sort of hunched over, sniffing the leaves or something on the ground. My dog made a whimpering noise and tried to chase it, and the thing looked straight up at him and just bolted. It ran further into the bushes until I couldn't see it anymore. As it ran, I noticed that it had really small legs, probably about half the length of its arms, in fact. I got out of the bushes as fast as I could, and after that, I just ran home. The thing looked very humanoid, though. I just want to know if what I saw, has anybody else seen anything like this? This happened quite a few years back when I was around 14 years old. Let me just preface this too by saying that I had previously been told by my old best friend, Jenna, that her neighbour had some really creepy tendencies. I slept over at her place a lot, but never encountered a creepy neighbour. This guy was married and had children apparently, and his house was directly behind Jenna's place. There was a wooden fence in her backyard too that separated the neighbour's backyard and theirs, and Jenna had a deck, and the stairs were a few feet off from the house, so you could fit a fairly small person in between the deck stairs and the house. You could also see into the neighbour's backyard if you were standing on the deck, but not if you were on the grass. So, with that understood, we had half a day at school, and I went back to Jenna's place. I wasn't allowed over that day, but since we were inseparable, it really didn't matter, and we weren't expecting her mum to be home from work for a good few hours anyway. Her mum ended up coming home early, so Jenna and I scrambled to the backyard so her mum wouldn't see me, so as not to get in trouble. We went outside and wedged ourselves in between the stairs and the house so her mum wouldn't hear the fence gate open, as it made a lot of noise whenever it was opened. We waited for a couple of minutes until we started hearing shuffling in her neighbour's backyard. We could faintly see him through the cracks of the wood, and it looked like he was putting out his recycling or garbage or something. Instead, he was making his way onto the bin and poking his head over the fence to look into their windows. From the backyard, you could see into Jenna's mum's window, the bathroom too, and parts of the kitchen. And we saw him, but he didn't see us. But we were shaking and holding onto each other for dear life as we watched our neighbour just stand upright on the bin to get a better view into the windows. He kept shifting from bin to bin to get better angles into what we assumed later was Jenna's mum's room, since she just got back from work and possibly into the bathroom. This went on for 5 to 10 minutes as well, us trembling and trying not to make a move or make noise while her creepy neighbour just kept trying to look into Jenna's house. He eventually got back down and went into a house like nothing had happened, while Jenna and I hopped a fence gate soon after. A few weeks later, we had another incident too, where Jenna's sister took a shower late at night and went to her room. Her blinds were open and it was dark outside. There was a tree that sat in the front yard and it was snowing pretty heavily. She called us on her phone saying that she apparently saw someone in the trees and couldn't see them anymore. We told her to turn her light off while Jenna and I did the same in her room, and we peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. We went to her sister's room though and asked what happened, and she was convinced that she saw someone in the tree who she believed was their neighbour. And so Jenna and I went out front to investigate. By that time, he was obviously gone, but we did find fresh shoe prints in the snow that went from the neighbour's front yard to the tree, then right up to Jenna's sister's window before it trailed off back to the neighbour's house. Technically, this isn't my story, it's my mum's, but I'm slightly involved, so I'd like to share it. This happened when I was around 3 or possibly 4, since it was in the summer. My parents and I had just moved into a new house in a safer neighbourhood in order to raise me. And basically, they were looking for new 60s themed furniture for our house, so my mother took to Craigslist to try and find some. She eventually reached out to a man selling an older couch. She had just taken me out of preschool before going to his house, so I was in the car with her. My mother is generally a very intelligent woman, although I'll admit being a first-time mother, this wasn't the best idea. But she had left me in the car because she didn't think it would take so long. He was standing outside of the house and, according to her, seemed like a completely average man, probably in his late 40s. He claimed the couch was in the basement and that they would have to go down there. Apparently, the couch was completely different than the one placed in the ad, so she turned around to ask him about it. And he was sweating out of his mind and apparently just started asking her a bunch of really creepy questions along the lines of, are you a virgin? How old are you? And are you married? My mother left pretty quickly after that and claims that he even chased after her down the driveway. She drove off as quickly as possible and to this day says that she thought that he was going to hit her over the head or something and sell her or something along those lines. This happened on a beach in the Philippines about 2 years ago. Me and my friends decided to take a quick vacation to let off some steam from work. And on our first night, we decided to drink outside of the hotel room. We got a little tipsy and one of my friends decided to take a walk on the beach and try to meet some other tourists there. I had a bit of a bad feeling about what might happen to him since he was already drunk. So I decided to join him together and with another friend. He said that he wanted to visit the rock formations, which is a known gay hookup spot since the place was dark and there were no other establishments on that part of the shoreline. It stretches about half the length of a football field with just pure darkness. I was reluctant about the idea of him going in there. I must admit that I was reluctant about the idea of him going in there, but he was adamant, so I agreed as long as he comes back after a few minutes. Me and my other friends waited on the last bar on the end of the shoreline before the dark area starts. Me and my friend were talking about something when we just heard a gut-wrenching scream. It sounded like our friend, so we decided to rush in. The only light at that time is coming from the moon, so my friend decided to pull out his phone and turn on the flashlight. We asked around and saw some people hooking up on the sand. We asked if they saw our friend, giving them descriptions on what he might look like, but they said that they never saw him. Our hearts were pounding at this point because we don't know what might have happened to him. We ran until we reached the end of it. There was a huge rock on the shore about 15 feet tall with a local guy standing on the top of it. We asked him, "Have you seen our friend?" He was about my height, wearing a black shirt, and he said, "Was he gay?" I don't see the relevance of the question, but I said yes, and he said he might have gone over to the mangroves over there, and then pointed to a darker spot of the beach filled with mangroves. Using only the light on the phone, we tried searching the small area. It looks like a tiny shelter with overgrown plants acting as the roof. And when we turned back, the guy on the top of the rock is already walking towards us, and then 2 more guys popped up behind him, probably hiding behind the huge rock as well. And then the guy who was on the rock did a karate chop on my friend's arm for him to let go of his phone, which was successful. As the phone rolled onto the sand, my friend was able to grab the phone back, and that's when he shouted, "Run." I was confused with what was going on, so I just started running after he said run without actually knowing what we were running from. And that was when it hit me that the whole thing was an ambush, that we were led into the mangroves for them to steal my friend's phone. I was running for a few seconds when I started feeling the weight on my feet. The sandals that I was wearing got really heavy because I wasn't aware that I was running on wet sand. My friend took off his flip-flops for him to run faster. I wanted to do the same, but then I realized my sandals were strap-on, so I just continued running. I can hear the guys chasing us saying, "Stop, we're just joking." I don't want to fall for what they said, so I continued running, and my legs are starting to feel numb since I'm not really an athletic person. And there came a point where I wanted to just stop since I don't have anything valuable with me, but then I thought that that could be a reason for them to harm me, so I just ran with all my might until we reached the first bar eventually. My friend was already there catching his breath when we saw the friend that we were looking for, laughing and talking to locals. We wanted to punch him for what he put us through, but he had no idea what had just happened, so we just let it go. Our vacation still went through, and we still got to go to the island from time to time, but we vowed to never go on that side of the beach ever again. In my old house, we not only had modern air conditioning vents, but we also had the original ones from 1922. The design was quite elaborate, though unfortunately I don't have any pictures of it. But anyways, one cool September day in 2015, I was sitting on the ground playing with my little brother, who had just turned 1. We were in the hallway at the bottom of the staircase where one of the original air vents were. We were sitting right next to it. I was playing peekaboo with him. He was laughing and smiling and really happy, just having a grand old time basically, playing with his awesome big sister. When I noticed a quiet hissing sound coming from the vent. It kind of sounded like Parseltongue from Harry Potter, if I'm being honest, but I just thought that there was something wrong with the heater or something, and I paid no mind to it. About 5 minutes after I had noticed the sound, it just suddenly stopped. I couldn't hear anything coming from it anymore, and the moment that I acknowledged that fact, my brother suddenly jumped, startled, and whipped his head around to face the vent. He had the look of just absolute fear on his face, right before he just started shrieking and crying. I mean, it honestly sounded like someone had hit this kid, he was crying so hard. Because of the way Landon was crying, my stepmom ran in from the kitchen. She looked as worried as I'd ever seen her, and she said, "Oh my goodness, what happened? Why is he crying like that? Did he hurt himself?" I explained to her what happened. Talking to Landon, who is still wailing with fear, she says, "It's okay." And then she says to me, "Well, what do you mean he just looked at the air vent and started crying?" I said, I don't know what he heard, but obviously whatever it was terrified him. She looked at me with honest confusion. She picked up my brother, still coddling him and swaying him as he cried, and walking him outside, and he was fine after a minute or two, but he would never go near that vent without someone with him. Even in 2017, after he turned 3, he would still ask for people to walk with him past that vent. I never heard anything from that specific vent, though I did hear the same hissing throughout the house when I was home alone or with one of my siblings. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little short story, and thanks for listening.
What you're about to hear is the launch episode of my new podcast, Tales from the Break Room. This new show is basically my excuse to start reading more scary stories about creepy people, specifically those you encounter at work. This episode features a man a little too concerned about an employee's flammability, a dancer from beyond the grave, and more. New episodes of Tales from the Break Room will air every Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And please do me a huge favor. Use the links in the description or pinned comment, or simply search for Tales from the Break Room on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and leave us a rating. This will help the show take off on the charts. Thanks so much. If you're wondering if future episodes of Tales from the Break Room will be published on this channel, honestly, I'm not sure. I don't want to have to censor it, and if it airs on YouTube, I'd have to. But that might change in the future. For now, future episodes will only air on podcast platforms. Thank you, and enjoy. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want your scariest work story to be narrated on Tales from the Break Room, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, and for a limited time, I'll be paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto Tales from the Break Room. I'm not sure how long I'll be able to continue paying for stories at this time. Anyway, on to the show.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Customers are beginning to pile in, but it's my coffee break, so not my problem just yet. Hey there. You know, the worst part about work isn't how boring it can be, or how difficult it might get. No, if you ask me, it's the customers. Sure, most of them are polite or quiet, but once in a blue moon you get that customer who doesn't seem quite right, and when you approach to greet them with a warm smile, the only warmth you feel in return is your own blood flowing from your throat. You didn't see the man's knife. You didn't know just how unhinged he was. You were simply working through another hour to make sure your family can keep a roof over their heads. That's the real horror, if you ask me. Oh, who am I? Just the closing shift manager of a cozy little coffee shop on the outskirts of town called Dead and Roasted. Working here for so long, I've got loads of stories to share with you. Stories from workers of every variety, experiencing allegedly real horror on and around the job. I hope you're ready to be scared. Because when you clock in, you may never clock out. These are Tales from the Break Room. Mr. Kindling Man, from Chrissy. There's no climax to this story, no being followed or anything like that. But this was a conversation I will not forget, and I still share it from time to time as one of my creepiest work stories. It was the fall of 2019. I started a job in a local crafts store that was right around the corner of my college campus. I was in the wood craft section with my section partner, Michelle. Note that our store was rather large, and we had to use a large movable stairway that was only 5 to 6 steps tall. From it, I could see all the way to the front of the store where the registers were, but people couldn't see me very well, not unless I made a big enough effort to be seen. I was moving products from the very top to the bottom, handing them to Michelle. At some point, she gets paged up front for a price check, and I'm left alone. Not 2 minutes go by. I'm at the very top of the staircase and I have my foot kind of dangling off because I was reaching for a wood crate. Suddenly, this old man comes up. He appears to be in his 60s. He's got a dark coat, shaggy gray hair, and smelled of old eggs if I'm going to be honest. Right away, without a word, he just grabs a hold of my ankle, and hard. I kinda winced and jumped because he had scared me. I looked at him, asking him what was up and if I could help him. He looked at me dead in the eye and said,
"You know, most of these wood items would make great kindling, and so would your ankle."
I was shocked. Like, why would you possibly say that, of all things? Not only that, but I was stuck on this staircase with no exit. If I tried to run, he might hurt me. But he also had a very firm grip of my ankle with his dirty, oil-covered hands. I quickly snapped back and whipped my foot back over his wrist. He let go, chuckling. At that moment, I proceeded to wave and call out for Michelle, trying to be as calm as possible. I said a customer had a question that I couldn't answer. By the time she got over there, the man was gone, and I didn't see him in the store. I told Michelle what happened. She told me to go take a break so I could calm down, which I happily did, and I finished out my shift with no further issues. Whatever that dude's problem was, I hope he isn't using fire to deal with it. Dancing in Death. From Princess Marlena. Many years ago, in a city I can't disclose, I performed as a dancer at a very old theater. I'd sometimes spend the night in the theater to avoid commuting, as the neighborhood in which the theater was located was very dangerous, especially after dark. Eventually, I decided to move into the theater, as rent was increasing and my relationship with my roommates was becoming tense. I packed my things and discreetly moved into the theater. This theater had showers, and there was a staff kitchen. I was very careful not to make a mess or overstock the fridge or freezer. There was a small convenience store that could supply me. I practically lived there. It saved me on rent money as the local apartments were costly. One night, as I slept on an old twin folding cot left forgotten in a small storage room, I heard what sounded like gentle footsteps. They were padding down the hallways, passing my little hiding spot just outside the door. I would hear this often, waking me up from an otherwise sound sleep. We didn't have security guards, and the cleaning staff would go home after certain hours. I knew when the administrative staff came and went, and this wasn't them. I would hear footsteps in the back rehearsal area of the theater, especially the dance rooms. The bars would occasionally rattle or shift. I even heard dance steps on the stage. I recognized the patterns as ballet dance steps. I wanted to tell someone, but I didn't want to get into trouble for squatting in the theater. This activity continued, and even increased for me. Then again, maybe it's because I noticed it more often. One night I snuck up into the dressing room backstage to retrieve something I'd forgotten in my locker after dance theater rehearsal. Upon unlocking my locker and retrieving the item, someone pushed the locker door closed right there in front of me. That someone was a ballerina. She was dressed in a leotard, tights, leg warmers, and ballet shoes. She looked like she had just come from rehearsal. She gave me this blank, cold stare, and I stared back in shock. No one else was supposed to be there in the theater at that time except for me. I gasped. Frantically, I spoke. "You're the one I've been hearing around here." The girl smiled but faded from sight like a shadow until she was gone. I couldn't believe it. I locked the locker and made my way back to my hiding spot. Since then, I swear I could still hear her in the theater from time to time. I even saw her practicing her dancing either in the back rehearsal dance room of the theater or even on the stage, whether the stage curtains were drawn or down. parted or raised. We had both vertical and horizontal operating curtains. I think she eventually found my hiding spot, as I would hear her tapping gently on my door. We sort of had an understanding, I think. I left her alone and she left me alone. On those rare occasions where I'd see her, I would stare or glance, but when I occasionally spoke to her, she would either just nod or shake her head. She never stayed in sight for long, nor would I hear her dancing for long. I never actively sought her out. It was like stumbling upon a deer in the woods. She may have even helped me out by alerting me from time to time if someone was coming, be it someone in the staff returning for something, or a surprise visit from someone on the board of trustees for the theater. Eventually, the performance season ended, and I was able to afford an apartment. Not to mention, I managed to land another performance gig at a different theater across town. The day I was packing up my things and moving out, I saw something written in the dust on the floor of the storage room. It read, "Goodbye, and break a leg." It hadn't been there before. I wrote, "Thank you," in reply and left. Now that I performed at a new theater, in my free time I looked up the history of that old theater at the library. I found an old news story on microfiche dating back many years ago. It was about a ballet dancer who had died in the theater. She had apparently overdosed on a dangerous and experimental diet drug that had led her to her death. She collapsed dead after curtain call of the final season's performance. It was a shame. I saw her photo, and it turned out she looked exactly like the woman I'd seen at that old theater, haunting the place. I'll never forget this encounter, but I rarely share the story of this experience, since I doubt anyone would believe me. And even if they do, I don't want them going to look for the theater and for that ghost. I just don't want people to bother her. I never went back, so I don't know if she's still there or not. But I wish her well, and I hope she finds peace. Murderer on the Loose, from James. I'm from the UK, and I work at a restaurant. I think this happened about 2 years ago. On that particular day, it was extremely quiet. I was doing some dishes in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, I heard a lot of voices in the restaurant. I went to see what was up, and the staff that was out there seemed all shaken up and worried. From the back of the restaurant windows, you could see into the beer garden. The staff said they saw a guy covered in blood holding a knife. Apparently, he had climbed and jumped over the beer garden fence. It looked as if he was fleeing from something. We later heard on the news a day or two later that there had been a murder in the area right near us. The guy who had done it was still on the loose. They said he was on drugs or something. I didn't see it, like I said, but just hearing about that really freaked me out. After all, we were all vulnerable, and anything could have happened. Luckily, he was caught and put away, but it goes to show you how you need to be careful all the time. That guy could have broken in, and God knows what could have happened. I remember a time on a Friday night about a year ago, when I was on shift at work. It was just a normal day. Nothing happened. We were just closing down as usual in the evening. My manager, Dan, came running down the stairs into the kitchen. He told us to lock all the doors and to keep a good lookout. That was scary, because you could just see how panicked Dan was. In the bar, a man who was completely intoxicated began to get violent, throwing glass bottles around at the staff. All the girls working on the bar that night were crying and terrified. This drunk guy had gone on a rampage around the pub, and no one knew where he was. They found him eventually and kicked him out, and he was arrested. I can't understand why people get drunk and suddenly get so violent. We've had some really tough and scary experiences at work. Something at the daycare. From Sweet Tooth 101. Growing up, I believe I experienced multiple instances of paranormal activity. But what I experienced one night at my first job was genuinely one of the most unnerving things to ever happen to me. It was about 15 years ago. I worked my first job right out of high school in childcare. Just to give you an idea, it was a small, privately owned daycare with only about 6 or 7 employees. Before the daycare was built, there was apparently a house and a junkyard on the property. And the rumor among the staff was the original owner of the property had died in the house, which was later demolished. One night, a lady that I'll call Amy and I were closing up. Her boyfriend came by to pick her up, and she asked me if I would be okay by myself if she went ahead and left. I told her yeah, I'd be fine, as I was almost finished cleaning. I finished vacuuming and watched through the window as they drove off. A moment after that, I turned the vacuum cleaner off, and all of a sudden, I heard the bathroom door slam shut. And I mean this thing slammed. The light and fan also came on in the bathroom about a second later. My initial thought was that maybe there was a child there trying to play a joke. But Amy always checked off a list of names as parents came to get their kids, and she checked every possible hiding place before leaving. I quickly put the vacuum cleaner away in the kitchen, and I started to head towards the bathroom. You know that feeling of dread you get when you feel as if you're about to do something scary or dangerous? That sinking feeling in your chest and stomach. Yeah, I full-on felt that. I quickly opened the bathroom door, turned off the light and fan, and I kid you not, from behind the door, I heard what I could only describe as an angry huff and a snarl. I should also mention that I felt a strange, almost tangible presence in that bathroom. And no, there were no kids hiding in the bathroom. There was only about 8 inches of space between the door and the wall when I opened it, so there wasn't any room for anyone to hide. I locked up for the night and left. I swear I felt something watching me as I was leaving. When I came back to work a couple of days later, I went back into the bathroom, closed the door, turned on the light and fan, just to see if it could have possibly been the fan making that snarling, huffing sound. I turned it on and off a couple of times and no sound. I told Amy about it. She said she wasn't surprised. She had worked there a few years before and had experienced some odd activity herself. She said that one day she heard chairs moving in the toddler room when all the kids were out in the main room. I should also mention that several months before my encounter, I was talking with another lady who worked there. She said they had been there on a closed day, wrapping Christmas presents for the kids and listening to Christmas music. She said that all of a sudden, the door to the toddler room just slammed shut. The radio station changed by itself, too. One of the other ladies started to head over to the radio to change the station back, but it quickly turned back on its own. I worked overnight security for a Fortune 500 company. From Darkness. Let me start by saying I'm writing this because I worked 4 years for a corporation that is very well known in the industry. They make a product that everyone has heard about and is extremely overpriced. It began the first day I began training for my job as an overnight security officer. My trainer began walking me through the 4-story, 2-winged corporate headquarters. The reason I started at this point is because of the random event that happened in the first hour. While showing me through the building, we came to the marketing department's area on the 3rd floor. The trainer was showing me some of the company's advertisements. One caught my eye because the model in the advertisement was a former college roommate and close friend of mine. We'd gone to school together at the other end of the state, so to see him in an ad at my new job shocked me beyond belief. A week later, when meeting a senior vice president of the company, she kept looking at me with scrunched eyes. When I finally asked her if something was wrong, she mentioned I looked like a former member of her church from her hometown, where she'd lived until 1998. I asked what town it was. She said the same name of the town I grew up in. I was shocked once again at the coincidence. I told her that's where I grew up. I had just moved to this new city 6 months prior. She asked me if I knew a man and dropped my father's name. I went wide-eyed and told her that was my dad. This woman had been on the church's trustee board with my father for years. We were 300 miles from that town, and 13 years had passed since she had moved. Just another random coincidence, but weird. A couple of weeks after that, a coworker of mine asked me how the night shift was going. I explained to him it was fine, except for 2 areas in the building, which gave me the creeps. Those areas were the hallway for the Human Resources Department, which gave me the odd sense that I was always being watched when I was in that area, and the executive meeting room, which gave off similar vibes. The coworker laughed and said it was just because the lights were off when I walked through those areas, and that I'd get used to it. About a week after that, the site supervisor called me one evening, asking me to come to work for a meeting. I figured I was losing my job, as I had just started, and was afraid I wasn't working up to their expectations. Color me surprised when I was walked into the client supervisor's office and given a non-disclosure agreement to sign. When I asked what this was about, he and my direct supervisor told me I had to sign it to find out everything. Reluctantly, I signed the paper. I was told it would be binding for 7 years. It was then explained to me that corporate security had been informed I was feeling uncomfortable in 2 specific places in the building. These locations happened to be spots where someone had died during construction of the office building the company was in. It was explained to me that certain members of the executive staff believed in the paranormal and had the lawyers draft up the NDA so rumors of paranormal activity didn't spread and ruin the company's reputation. Another shocking moment for me at this job. I was also informed that the security cameras caught things on a regular basis. In fact, the supervisor showed me a few clips of office furniture moving on its own at night. There was a chair swiveling when no one was around, a door to the emergency exit stairwell opening with no one there. I was told if I caught anything like this, or saw it in person, I was to report it to the security supervisor so it could be saved for their documentation. I would later find out the company was moving to a new location and was using this collected evidence to show the landlord what was happening in the building. Over the next year, many events happened, from seeing shadows on the cameras in the break rooms to seeing black mass orbs scurrying around the legal departments area while walking my assigned tours. The worst event at that site happened on the 4th of July in 2012. I was finishing a tour through the HR hallway when I heard a woman scream. I was alone in the building, so I freaked out. The lights were on in the area and no one was around. I noped out of that area, texting my supervisor about what happened. He responded that I was to remain at the security desk for the rest of the night and to ignore my security patrols, that he would be at the work site at 7 a.m. to talk to me. For the next 3 hours, I sat in the security room, freaking out because it was so loud. It sounded like someone was being hurt. When my supervisor showed up, he told me he was shocked I had gone almost 7 months before I heard anything like this. He apologized for not warning me ahead of time. He said usually other security guards heard whispers or voices, but a couple of guys had also heard screaming and yelling. The next major incident happened when I was asked to cover a shift at the company's plane hangar at the local airport. It was my first night there, and I was given a rundown of my patrol tasks. One task was to restock the employee soda fridge, so the air crew had cold soda when they came to work. The fridge was located in a small storage room next to the security office. The first night I refilled the fridge from soda boxes that were stacked on a shelf in the room. I restocked the fridge and left the room. As soon as I closed the door, I heard a loud bang coming from it. Thinking I might have banged into something on my way out, I opened the door to investigate. I found a can of Coke lying on the ground behind the door. The issue was all the cans were either in the fridge or on the shelf at the opposite end of the room 10 feet away. There was no way a can was randomly flying 10 feet from a shelf. I told my relief about the incident in the morning. He laughed and told me I had just met the resident ghost. Apparently, I didn't fill the fridge with enough Coke, and that's why the can was thrown at the door. The last 2 major incidents happened 2 days in a row at the site of the new corporate headquarters. The new building was built between 2012 and 2014. During construction, all the other guards swore the new building was even more haunted than the last. They claimed they heard footsteps and voices when no one was around. I never personally witnessed this, as I was stationed in the security car while the building was being built. But once it was completed, I had my worst experience to date. The first thing happened while on security patrol on a Sunday afternoon. I was on the phone with my mother as I walked through the building. When I got to a group of cubicles in the purchasing department, I was startled by a calendar page being flipped aggressively as I walked past. I jumped and shouted out of being scared by the event. I went over to the cubicle where the event occurred and could not find anyone else in the area. My mother had even heard the paper rustle and me screaming. She freaked out because she had never heard me yell like that before. The final event happened the next day. I was walking by the same desk in purchasing. I was vigilant this time, so I wouldn't be scared again, or so I hoped. This time, however, it was not a random item being moved. I turned a corner, and I was greeted by a partially formed apparition standing in a doorway. I absolutely jumped out of my skin and ran down to the security office to report the incident. The other guard rewound the security footage of me and saw a quick glimpse of me jumping as I turned the corner. Another camera angle showed the apparition that I'd seen. I quit that day. I was tired of being scared at my own job, and no amount of anything was going to keep me there. Pretty creepy, right? Seems like if your job isn't haunted by restless spirits, it's haunted by the creepiest sorts of customers, or even coworkers. Well, it's time for me to clock back in. Those rigor mortis lattes aren't gonna make themselves. I'll see you again on my next break, with more tales from the break room. Until then, try to survive your next shift. Tales from the Break Room is part of the EerieCast network. It's hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him at Dark Prevails on Twitter. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. To have your scariest workplace experiences told on the show, send them to us at eriecast.com/submit. Starting April 14th, 2022, we're now paying 3 cents per word for stories that make it onto the show for a limited time and PayPal only. EerieCast is a horror podcast network. For more scary stories and unsettling podcasts, go to eriecast.com.